Good evening, everyone. My name is Carmen Micu. I'm representing IASE, the International Association for Sustainable Economy. And together with my distinguished panelists and invitees, I am your host for this part of the conference tonight. I would say as well hello to our European and American fellows, which are a bit um, earlier in the day than our partners in Seoul. And it is my pleasure today to conduct you through a bit of information regarding our endeavor, especially from IASE, and as well to have a debate together with the panelists around the ESG issues as we see it coming forth. So thank you, and I will start my presentation now. I hope you do see it now. Yes. Yeah, thank you. I will share with you brief information about our vision regarding the ESG issues and what we aimed for when we have built IASE, the International Association for Sustainable Economy. There was a clear need for high quality online education, and that was clear when we were tackling the issues regarding environment, social, and governance. And hence we were thinking about building a certification pillar. The focus is not only the financial sector, but also other ones. And it is necessary to mention that we have to train specifically by level and by role and by industries. And we are going to talk about it in a short while. And the aim was to create a fully international non-for-profit entity based in London, and which is going to certify the ESG matters in a wider spectrum. And this is only be one association certifying it by country area. But before we go into more technical details, I would like you to bear with me a bit of information as to the rationale behind building the IASE. We know that the most important thing when it comes to companies and entities, it's talking about value and value creation. And where we're looking for is it ESG and ESG investment really bringing value to the companies, and not only to the listed ones, but also to all the entities acting in economic environment. And I have gathered here today a bit of information which is confirming that ESG creates value, not only on short term, but mostly on the long term, and brings success and prosperity to the communities they are acting in. I have inserted a few slides with information from a McKinsey report, which we value very much. And I'm going to argument that when we look at the impact, the ESG proposition on equity returns, we find that there's 63 positive impact with really important findings. And even more, when we look at the ESG proposition, we have an impact on the following five topics. We look at the top line growth, we look at the cost reductions, we look at the regulatory and legal interventions, we look at productivity uplift, and investment and asset optimization. Therefore, if we have a strong ESG proposition in these 5 different topics, we see that this is really building up value and it's creating it. And it's essential for any company and entity to look into it when thinking on a long-term strategy and long-term impact in their communities. Because nowadays we don't talk anymore about having an impact on a bottom line. Is not so much about how we deliver quick and building up profit for short term, but it's more, especially with the COVID pandemic crisis, it's more looking into how we impact our communities, and how we can build up a sustainable economy throughout times of turmoil such as this one, how we prepare and tackle the risks. Is the ESG strategy and ESG development in our companies bringing that more stability and more value creation on the long term? So this is how we look at things. I would like as well to share with you the impact on financial performance, because on majority of cases we think that the company exists there to make profit, which is of course true, but profit is not anymore the first the topic that we are looking into it. We look at financial performance on the long term, and the positive impact, if we look at this graphic, which is from the net community in 2018 study, it looks like definitely the companies are having a high impact, and medium, they look already 64% of the companies have high impact measured of the ESG strategies if they implement it in their companies on the financial performance. If we look as well, we have the listed companies and the unlisted companies. Of course, the listed companies are more incentivized to work with the ESG standards and to promote ESG reporting and ESG key performance indicators. And therefore, you see here a 60% higher impact on financial performance when it comes to creating value on the listed companies' information. And before we go into more details, I would just quickly like to add a bit of information regarding what questions we should ask when we think about sustainability issues, and why, again, the reason why we have created IASE. When looking into ESG, we should ask ourselves, do we have regular access to the information needed to evaluate risks emerging from environment and social trends? And the answer and the steps should be, we should establish or increase the frequency of management reporting of sustainability risks and escalate it more to the board level, to the persons which are responsible to implementing it. Another question is, how frequently do we discuss sustainability risks? Is that often on our board agenda, on our board's agenda, executive and non-executive? Because if not, we should really look into it and add it to our agenda. Do we have a board committee which is focusing on sustainability risk, or do we have a person responsible for that? Do we have a task force within our company that is taking care of the ESG issues? If not, again, we should clarify the responsibilities and then the roles. And if possible, depending on the entity's dimension, we should add a board committee with a sustainability mandate. Who on management and board levels has sustainability competencies? And this is our hot topic for today within IASE. That's why we have built the certification processes, and we aim to put it now in front of you and to deliver it to the responsible persons, because we need to build up that competence. There is not so much existing in the market today, and we should consider giving it either to a special committee, as I said before, or to elevate these competencies to specific persons within our company. Do we have an understanding and a list of critical stakeholders regarding ESG topics and how we are meeting their needs as means of driving shareholder value? We should ensure that management has established clear sustainability responsibilities for functions such as finance, investor relations, legal, risk, strategy, talent, and operation. And we should have a clear message on long-term strategy that considers this kind of risks and opportunities. We should have a disclosure strategy with clear priorities of the needs of the stakeholders and align the sustainability to business value. What external sustainability disclosures do we provide, and how confident are we that they are complete, accurate, and reliable? This is a matter of again, how we manage within ourselves, within our company, that we have standards to deliver that we have very clear system, and we document it consistently with our sustainability reporting process and controls. And are sustainability risks specifically included in the company's ERM programs and processes? We should have our management taking care of the processes and ensure that they are all incorporated in our processes. This being said, I hope I delivered you the information needed to represent the reason and the rationale, the reason why and the rationale of building up the IASE certifications, international sustainability business and international sustainable business and international sustainable finance. Moving forward, we believe strongly that IASE has the power to change lives. We are the International Association for Sustainable Economy, and we envision a future in which our society understands the importance and benefits of the ESG process criteria and how it can make our lives better. We envisage a future in which consumers can readily identify competent and ethical professionals who place environmental, social, and governance gender interests first. We envision a future in which practitioners, professional practitioners, aspire to the highest levels of professionalism and excellence, in which companies, regulators, governments, and many other stakeholders internationally are recognizing ESG topics. Our history is for now very brief. We have just been incorporated with our headquarters in London, and we are representing the sustainability profession globally regarding standard setting and advocating on behalf of the profession to international organizations, governments, businesses, non-government organizations, and civil society. In addition, we provide the most relevant knowledge and resources in supporting and protecting the evolving public interest. Our vision is to develop environment, social, and governance into recognized and respected profession the world over. Our mission is to benefit humanity by establishing, upholding, and promoting global standards for the ESG profession as evidence of the International Sustainable Finance Specialist and International Sustainable Business Specialist, twin certification that are marking significant higher level of excellence in the practice of this profession. We aim to setting the standards. In consultation with our global stakeholders, we are establishing and enforcing compliance with the highest global professional and ethical standards for ESG practitioners, as well as certification requirements for those aspiring to professional levels of practice. IASE certification marks are the standards of excellence for ESG professionals worldwide. Our strategic focus areas include leadership and advocacy for the ESG profession, includes recognition and awareness within IASE community and within the global community. IASE has the ability to change lives for the better, we've said. In consultation with our global stakeholders, we are establishing and enforcing compliance with the highest global professional and ethical standards for sustainability practitioners, as well as of certification requirements, and for those aspiring to these professional levels. I will briefly talk about the structure. We are governed by our board of directors, which is meeting regularly, remotely now, of course, because of the pandemics. And each country association is represented by one member at the board of directors level. The founding members have the right to speak and vote. The entity has a general assembly represented by one member per country. The assembly duties are approving the budget, auditing the accounts, appointing the chairman, vice chairman, treasurers, and renew the board membership. Our relations between IASE and our members It's through a membership agreement, which is open and renewable 3 years now. Exams and continuous professional development is performed by a third-party entity in order to provide the same standards internationally. The entity also provides academic directorship, institutional committee, chairman advisor council, ethics committee, and academic scientific committees. In brief, this is the way we work, and I think what it's important to talk about, it's a bit of our qualifications. The International Sustainable Finance, International Sustainable Business credentials are one of the most desired and respected global certifications for those seeking to demonstrate their commitment to competent and ethical ESG practices. Our qualifications symbolize excellence and utmost professionalism in the ESG and sustainability profession world over. Our methodology and standards are designed in consultation with experienced sector practitioners. All the IASE qualifications are quality assured and supported by relevant learning outcomes, are flexible and allowing you to create a learning pathway to suit your needs. What it's important to mention, I'm trying to fit within the timing proposed by our hosts, is that we are now represented in 25 countries all over the world, from Americas to Europe to Africa and to Asia. Our collaborating entities are prestigious entities such as Green Climate Fund, Exponential Education, Seoul National University, Institute for Finance and Nachfolgeplanung, which is in German, the future, planning the future, Association Nationale des Conseils Financiers, Climate Trade, Alastria, Envisia, Good Governance Academy, and Personal Finance Society. I thank you very much for your patience and for your interest in our conference. And I am now giving the floor to my first invitee. And I'm going to stop sharing. Professor Nada Kakabatse, Professor of Policy, Governance and Ethics at Henley Business School, International Association for Sustainable Economy invitee, which kindly accepted to talk to us today about the ESG topics and ESG issues from the insights with so much wealth of knowledge and know-how Nada prepared for today. So Nada, the floor is yours, and thank you again for your participation, for your time. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Good afternoon, everybody, or for some of you, it's good evening. Let me share my presentation. I'm Nada Kakabatse, and I'll be talking about ESG consideration, really, which is already introduced by Carmen. And I'd like to reflect on last few centuries, where we've been and where we are now. And in last 4 centuries, we always had some industrial transformation, call it revolution. And first industrial revolution was really fueled by coal. Second one in 19th century by electricity. Third one in 20th century, which is a nuclear and gas fueled. And here we are in 21st century, which is a green energy, which supports fourth industrial revolution. And that's the reason, because in the fourth green energy, that's the reason ESG is becoming very, very important, because it's a quite transformation. And that ESG transformation, it's of course technological, but any technological transformations are rather crude, rather cold. It requires really social, cultural transformation to adopt that technological transformation. Otherwise, technology cannot do it for us. It's us people who can really adapt to this new technological environment and use technology for a better of life, of course. What is critical to that, of course, in education. We need to understand what technology can do and how can we improve our life as well, environment around us for a better. So understanding the soft, more personal dynamics needed to innovate technology to accomplish this green transformation. It's really, we have this technology, but do we know how to use it to accomplish the transformation? That know-how, it's really through learning from experimentation and education. It also requires collaboration because people have to collaborate with each other. We can't do things in isolation. So ESG initiative need to lead to value creation proposition. Other way, it won't be adopted. As long as it can be linked to value creation, then people are more likely to think about it in more positive terms and adopt it in organizations. Because organizations are really about value creations. So, there are many ESG initiatives, and I put here just a few to refresh your memory. I'm sure you know many more. It's a principles of responsible investment. It's UN Sustainable Development Goals, climate relation financial disclosure, the 30% Club, the Corporate Human Rights Benchmark, the Workplace Disclosure Initiative, and many more. Sometimes people think that there are too many initiatives and it's difficult to follow. So there is a very poor implementation, although we have all those great initiatives, and each initiative in themselves are really worth pursuing in them. But implementation is very poor, as is poor regulatory frameworks. Very few countries have a really good regulatory frameworks which facilitate adoption and promote adoption of ESG's principles. So this is one of frameworks which EU has promoting, which is European Green Deal, which has a very ambitious target for a climate neutral continent to be by 2015. So we have 30 years from now. It's very ambitious. It includes UN Sustainable Development Goals within itself, but it's much more than those UN goals. And cannot be achieved by Europe acting alone, because we know that the environment is not just European, environment is a global, so we need those good initiatives taken across the globe. However, this initiative is supplemented or complemented by a new European Bauhaus initiative. Why is the new European Bauhaus? For those who are not familiar with Bauhaus concept or construction house was concept in 1930s, which was started as an architectural innovation, but was multidisciplinary and was quite innovative. It really has a lot of innovation. And of course, it was then disrupted by the Second War, but it was quite innovative. It has much focus on interdisciplinarity, all which is needed to adopt ESG. It's fragile, and fragility is with any of those frameworks. If there is no strong uptake, if people don't understand it, then it won't work. So the fragility is there. It has social purpose, and certainly ESG has social purpose, so did the Bauhaus. It has creativity, it was a very creative project, and ESG is a creative in a way. And Bauhaus provided identity. You could recognize a Bauhaus design. You even know there are certain buildings, there are certain objects of art, which you can still see it and say, aha, this is a Bauhaus design. It provided identity. So why Europeans are calling for new Bauhaus construct is to supplement the European Green Deal. It is that soft issue that people need to go behind that idea and adapt it to be interdisciplinary across organization, across science, in arts, to really have focus on social purpose and creativity, and it will give a new identity, ESG identity, European identity, and hopefully global identity. So ESG varies from country and regions. It depends also varies from company to company and varies from different index. There are numerous indexes, and I just put here, there is a corporate social performance index. There is corporate environmental performance index. There is a corporate governance performance index, and there are more indexes. So the difference between region, between companies, between indexes are quite large. Why is difference between country and region? Well, it is that each region or country adopts it differently. Adoption of ESG initiatives is voluntary. It is not mandatory, it's voluntary. For example, EU, it's very focused on environmental and social aspects of ESG. And we have to understand EU background. EU was created after the Second World War, and it started in 1950s by joining coal and steel companies across the Europe, making cooperation between coal and steel. Remember, we are already in the third industrial revolution, but we're still depending on coal even in the 20th century. So coal and steel. And it was why is that? It was economic collaboration to create the peace. So Europe was not about necessary trade, but it was, of course, trade was used to create the peace. So Germany, for example, is more concerned with environment, and Norway, for example, is more concerned with social policies. When we come and look at the UK, US, it is much more focused on G, on governance, because it's all about trade. Okay, so governance is important because you want to enhance trade. When you look at Singapore, international trade is important, so they had focus on CSR, corporate social responsibility adoption, in order to support trade. So those are just examples. So difference also depending on the laws of the operating with the country, custom, tradition, and values. What do you value? For example, Europe value peace, UK, US trade values trade. So those are quite influential laws, custom, tradition, and values. When you're looking difference between companies, of course, there are those companies which are more stakeholder oriented, which is high quality environmental reporting they produce. They're more communitarian. Those are usually stakeholders orientation is also more predominantly in the countries which practice civil law. Okay, like Germany, like France, it's a civil law. Then the countries which practice more shareholder, companies which are more shareholder oriented, they're usually based on common law. And as you know, common law system is very adversarial system. So it is more about adversarial, where two parties are in opposition and judges act more as a mediator of between those two parties, not investigator, but mediator. So it is a quite difference. So what the shareholder companies do more, it is a lot of protecting shareholders and produce reports which are much more greenwash. Okay, so they're just there because they need to do, or it promotes certain things, but it's not a major thing. It's not the DNA who they are. They are much more a greenwash or whitewash, whatever people like to call it. We have done a study here in UK with growth companies, and those growth companies are those which are not listed on the primary stock exchange, which is a FTSE stock exchange, but it's on the secondary stock exchange, AIM. Okay, and so the just below the growth companies, and what we found, it is that they have very high awareness of ESG. However, it's a very poor adoption. Only few, it's inconsistent and very poor. There is also very poor understanding of accountability and responsibility. Who is responsible for ESG? Who is accountable? In some companies, that is a finance director. Somewhere, it's somebody else. Somewhere, CEO. Sometimes is a board member. So it's not clear. Also, not clear between clarity, responsibility between board and management team and CEO and chair and CFO. That clear of lines of responsibility are not there. Also, who is accountable for what? It's not clear as well. So there is no discipline for strategy delivery, even if they have ideas of ESG as a, that they should be adopting. They don't know how is a right way to deliver the strategy on ESG. So that was disappointing. For what we found that for ESG adoption, it is mandatory that ESG is integrated in the strategy. If it's not integrated in the strategy, then it's just a lip service, then there'll be just whitewash reporting. It also companies which build ESG infrastructure with the clarity of role and responsibility for ESG, they do better. It also has to be key board responsibility. Somebody on the board has to be responsible for ESG, and those issues have to be discussed at the board level. Other way, it won't have enough prominence. It's also necessary for a company to choose an appropriate standard of ESG. And one model does not fit all. Depends on the size of the sector you are. If you are in the financial sector, or you are pharmaceutical sector, or extractive industry sector, you have a different standard. And also the company which build discipline for strategy delivery, how they're going to overcome all obstacles and deliver the strategy where it's needed, those companies do better than those which don't have this in place. Also, that you need a leadership for ESG, and that is important. And leadership, we're talking about organization, and you have to have a shared view on competitive advantage. What is a competitive advantage of this company, and how can we enhance it? What is differentiation for us? How we differentiate our product, our service, what we about in the marketplace from others who may be in the same industry? How we deliver value, how we gain value, how we achieve that value, and how ESG can enhance our reputation. So that is shared view on ESG and competitive advantage. It's necessary. Also, leadership which is mission-based rather than vision-based. What I mean mission-based, it is who we are, what we are there to achieve. That is a mission. And irrelevant who is a leader, we all share that mission. When organization vision-based, every time a change of leadership, a new CEO, a new board come in, we change the vision. So it depends of the vision of that individual. Sometimes a good vision, sometimes not so good vision. We go sometimes forwards, sometimes backwards. And that is unpredictable. Mission organizations, irrelevant who is the CEO, pursue the same mission. And the vision is then only how we achieve that mission. Okay? So they do mission organization, do better with the ESG than vision-based organization. And also leadership has to be responsive to contextual demands. It's a different EU, it's a different in UK. You also need to engage through misaligned interests. There is a lot of need for discretionary action because things are not black and white. There are many fracture points in the organization, and leadership has to negotiate that through. You have to engagement. You have to engage to those misaligned interests in order to deliver this strategy of ESG. Also be aware of transnationalism leads to imagery projection, that people project particularly image, but is that image substantiated? Okay. What is necessary for ESG? Well, we found that there is an inadequate education and valuation models for ESG. And that's a major barrier for integrating ESG into the mainstream of investment decision, because our study was done with organization as well with the main investors. So that was quite a thing for investors. ESG works well when integrated with strategy, but it does not necessarily enhance its operational performance because it is costly. So that for larger organization, it may enhance performance right away. For a smaller organization, it may take time. So in long run, it will create an enhanced performance, but not in the short term because it may associate certain costs. Because you have to produce reports, you have to employ people who are maybe responsible for ESG, you have to really change how you think, so, and how things you do. So it may be initially costly, but not in the long run. So ESG is a really socio-political movement and is gaining ground. And if the company ignore it, they're definitely going to have reputational damage. So it cannot be ignored. It's going to stay here. ESG can enhance reputation if it's well done. Do we need ESG certified professional? Yes, and we need them because acquisition of new qualifications is necessary because you need new skills, and we found that many companies didn't have those skills and they couldn't implement. So you need skills to understand principles and art of ESG management, and both from fiduciary responsibility as well as from a firm's performance and investment mandates. So you really need those skills, and certification certainly provide that. You need to implement effectively ESG activities for organization, so you need that understanding and the skill, and to be responsible for management of system, auditing, reporting, which you know, effective reporting, not reporting which is just a whitewash. So it has to be real meaningful reporting. Also, how to improvement in value chain, it builds sustainable future, and help you staying ahead of your profession. As every profession, it helps you being informed even after you get your certification, because you belong to that professional club of ESG professionals. Thank you for listening. If you have any question, I'm happy to answer if time allowed. Other way, I shall return you to Carmel.
Thank you very much, Nada. Although I knew your presentation before, I am still amazed by the comments and the insights that you have shared behind the whole presentation. And I wanted to quickly ask you before we go into the panel, but I'm sure the debate is going to be even more steamy. Why do you believe that the Bauhaus trend took so much to be adopted? For me, it was a surprise to find out about it, although I knew, but the impact on the ESG arena was interesting, the way you have placed it. So why do you think it took so much to be adopted?
Well, why? Because Bauhaus it was a movement. Okay, it was movement, and I think ESG is a movement. So technology is one thing, but you need social movement to achieve it, that implementation, and that is Bauhaus provided conceptual framework for that social movement of ESG. It has all these attributes. It has fragility about it, has innovation about it, it has a social purpose about it, and it's very interdisciplinary. And ESG is very interdisciplinary. You need not only ESG professionals have to work well with other professionals, with finance people, with sales people, with marketing people, with strategists. They need to work with them in order to provide those initiatives and reporting. You can't work as an ESG professional in isolation.
Yeah, it's a whole team, and it's the strategy which needs, as you said as well, embedded in the whole company strategy, and to be reinforced from really top levels down to bottom. That people need to really adopt the idea, the concept, and of course the execution. As you were saying, it's improving not only the financial bottom line, but also the reputation, and which means long-term added value, which means brand equity, paying back into the brand equity of the company. But all of this wouldn't be happening, and it wouldn't be actually valid unless everybody works towards the same goal and everybody understands that it's not a, I like again the term greenwash. It's not greenwashing our company because it looks nice, bottom line and top, and in our reporting, the IR reports at the stock exchange. It should be really because we believe in it.
Well, we know now that up to 80% of share price is really reputation, and only 20 to 40% it's really asset value. So reputation is becoming a major, major thing for organizations. They cannot ignore it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
ESG enhances that, but equally can damage it if they don't do it well.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Nada, again for your insights. Highly appreciated, and for our short dialogue. I'm happy to notice that all our distinguished panelists are here, and I'm going to move onwards to our next point on the agenda, our panel. And I'm inviting all my guests to open their cameras and their micros. Yeah, everybody can hear us. It's with us. And I'm starting to introduce each of the invitees. I have here, if I see you, Godfrey, you are here. It looks like you have your camera on, but I do not see you. Let me.
I'm not sure. I can see you and my
Yeah,
camera is certainly on.
yeah. Perfect, perfect. Now I see you. I'm just
Okay,
checking.
good.
So, dear guests and dear audience, allow me to introduce you my colleague, Godfrey Nitti, Vice Chair, International Association for Sustainable Economy. Godfrey, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks very much. It's good to be here.
Next on the agenda, it's Jochen Brursen, Policy Officer at European Commission. Jochen, I cannot see you.
Yes.
Better?
Yes.
Hello. Oh, welcome as well. You are very sunny.
Okay.
White. You're black and white.
You're black and
Yeah,
white.
Exactly.
We need some color.
this is for the next conference.
Oh, perfect. Thank you very much, Johan, as well for joining. And
Pleasure.
we have Joris Lasseur, manager of the engagement team with a focus on responsible clean tech from Sustainalytics. Welcome, Joris. Yeah, we see you. We do not hear you. I think you have your mic off. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Thank you for having me today.
So thank you all for joining me. I'm looking forward to our discussion, which is, of course, focusing on ESG innovation in education, and the reason why, as Nada also explained during her presentation, why it's important that we enforce the idea of having professionals, and of course, achieving professionals can only be done through education. And I will start my panel making a few statements and asking a few questions. And I propose that each of you, because you are coming from different perspectives, from policymakers to corporation, to reporting, to infrastructure. So please do share with us your perspective on the topic. And I will start by asking the general question, do ESG standards for compliance have to vary exceeding the size of the organization and sector requirements? Because as all the ESG reporting standards now are currently under review, especially listed companies are continually facing heightened demands for corporate transparency from various stakeholders. And this would be, of course, my first question. Are ESG reporting standards satisfactory for regulators and users? And I will ask you, Joris, if you please, if you are feeling comfortable to jump in, and because I know Sustainalytics is very much involved in this. What is your take?
Um, would you want me to introduce my organization briefly first or immediately respond to the question?
Of course, of course, please do.
All right. So just a very quick introduction, not assuming that everybody knows my company. I'm Joris Lasseur. I work at Sustainalytics, which is one of the well, we're mainly known for our ESG risk ratings that we sell to institutional investors around the world. And earlier this year, Sustainalytics became a company of Morningstar. So now we're officially a listed company ourselves as well. But the Sustainalytics brand continues to exist and be used separately, but we're definitely increasingly integrating everything we do because we've always been very pure play ESG focused. But Morningstar the positive is that Morningstar is very dedicated to integrate ESG much deeper into their broader offering to institutional investors, and so that's a big opportunity for Sustainalytics to extend its reach and to make ESG truly integrated in what investment teams around the world are seeing on their screens and systems. Yeah, so the main thing that we do is we help develop and implement responsible investment strategies for investors. I myself, I have a tenure, most experience in corporate greenhouse gas emissions accounting in previous roles. But last year, I joined a new team at Sustainalytics called Engagement Services, where we really ask questions like the ones that Carmen presented a little earlier on her presentation. So the questions that Carmen presented that could be asked or should be asked to companies are really representative for questions that I'm asking to companies throughout the year. So just to confirm that. Yeah, and Carmen, if it's okay, then maybe I'll try to kick off and maybe reflect a bit on your questions that you asked. Is that okay?
Yes. Thank you so much, Joris, for your introduction. Obviously, we know you very well, and we know Sustainalytics. We work with the company, so it was a very welcome introduction from your side. Whilst I let you reflect on the question, yeah, if the current standards, reporting standards are satisfactory for the stakeholders involved, I would pass maybe quickly on introducing
Sure.
Johan, if you are okay, Johan, to introduce a bit the organization and yourself in between.
With pleasure. Thank you very much, Carmen. So I'm working in the European Commission in the Director General for Research and Innovation. And very pertinently for today's discussion, our commissioner, I think you know her well, Maria Gabriel. She is also in charge of the DG Education. So we feel fully exposed when we talk to her. We see always the two streams of education and research as one of the foundations. And I think that's very pertinent for today's discussion. In my function today, I'm representing the unit who will push ESG inside our research policy areas. And we are in very active discussions following up the EU taxonomy steps and the wider perspectives coming. But let's kick off the discussion. I'm keen to hear from the others. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well. And Godfrey, last but not least, maybe a quick introduction from yourself as well.
Thank you very much. It's certainly good to be here. I'm the Vice Chairman of the International Association for Sustainable Economy. Again, this is what we're going to be discussing today. I think is quite topical with respect to discussions around sustainability. Education is quite a key part of, as we talk about standardization of ESG around the world. There's also that need for standardization of of the education, so like that there's easy communication around the world. So I'm quite keen to have that discussion, this discussion today, and be able to learn from my fellow panelists as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will kick off the panel. Coming back to my question, Joris, are you comfortable in coming with some insights from Sustainalytics?
Yes, of course. It's still it's easily a very broad topic, so please excuse me. I have to make some choices what to share, what
Yes.
trying to assess what the audience would find valuable here. But at Sustainalytics, we generally really value the EU taxonomy. It's really regarded as a milestone because knowing what to ask for is step one. And obtaining it is step two. And so we're part of that equation. So the taxonomy for us is very interesting because it makes a lot more tangible and specific what society expects corporates to report on, and then they need to be able to collect that data somehow and report it. And companies like ours will be picking up on that pretty quickly. So we've also increased our capacity to monitor the developments in the European Union specifically because they're quite leading, and we want to make sure that we keep up with that and that we're quick enough for our ratings also to reflect what's becoming more the standard, potentially even globally. But what we're also seeing is that only the most advanced, okay, don't quote me on this necessarily, but my impression is definitely, I have to be a bit careful because I'm not the authority on this particular topic, but what I think I feel safe sharing here is that only the most advanced companies, they're pretty close to what the EU taxonomy seems to be demanding, and many other companies in developed markets, but especially in emerging markets, because investors typically invest globally, and so there's a huge spread in diversity in how mature ESG reporting really is. And so yeah, even the most advanced will have to adapt to the taxonomy, but then there are even more companies that are really not even close to it. And Sustainalytics cannot dictate as a rating agency what they report, but we can definitely tell them, share our knowledge and interpretation of the taxonomy, so it becomes easier for them in the feedback loops where they need to be heading. And the other comment that I wanted to share is that I've been with Sustainalytics for a little over a decade now, and as a personal experience, I can really tell things are changing for the positive inside the companies. So before we struggled to get feedback from companies on our ESG assessments, and we would typically talk to somebody in a sustainability or communications department, and the investor relations departments 10 years ago, they weren't really interested mostly, and that has really changed. So IR is all over it now. So you can really see that for investors it matters, and the investor relation departments, they cannot afford to ignore it anymore. On the contrary, they're really quite opening up to it in many jurisdictions. And the pain a little bit in the short term is that they still have the same small teams on sustainability. So the whole world is asking these companies for lots and lots of information, regulators like the EU, but also us as a rating agency and the investors individually. They all want to know more and have more transparency, but often the sustainability teams that need to provide this disclosure, well, they're growing maybe, but they tend to be small. So they have a much bigger mandate, but they still have a limited amount of FTEs, and that's been a challenge for the companies even if they want to respond to all these information requests from out there. That's what's going on. And then lastly, maybe the investors are traditionally the ones that pay for ratings like ours. And so the companies couldn't care too much at first because there was, yeah, it wasn't super pressing. But now you can tell that the issuers, the companies, are getting more nervous. They want to exert more control over their ratings, and so we're getting a lot more feedback from the companies these days, which is positive. It's also more work for us, and we also need to have capacity to be accountable on our assessments to the companies as well. So just a few trends. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yes, thank you so much, Jerry. So one additional questions because you have mentioned so many perspectives on the topic of the standards of the reporting standards and the way the team is actually working, the inside of company team, yeah, is working, and the fact that IR, for example, it's coming all over, it's all over the topic, of course, because as Nada was mentioning, it adds a lot on reputation, and it adds a lot on the value at the stock exchange. How do you see from your perspective, and the question is actually addressed of course to all, how do you see from your perspective the working together, investors, companies, stock exchanges, policymakers, to improve the value of the ESG disclosure?
Yeah, I'll be happy to let someone else speak first. I don't intend to do all the talking today, but happy to reflect later.
Okay, so Jochen,
I'm happy to comment on that.
Yes, please.
It's not sufficiently happening. That communication of between those various parties is not sufficiently happening. That is something which needs to improve. And I quite agree with Joris. That's what I got from interviews as well when I was talking to companies. There are a lot of demands. There are a lot of demands from different various stakeholders. Report on this, report on that. And the smaller companies cannot cope with that. Large companies, because they have whole departments, they cope with that. But there is no really integrated way. There is no systematic way how it's done. Okay. So there is need for more, standard what you want. One information for investor, what is for stock exchange, what is for different rating agency. So there is a lot of demands for the companies, and there is no communication necessary between those parties.
Yeah, it looks definitely so. I want to talk a bit about the government roles and regulations that are playing here. Is it this role clear for everybody? Is this something that you see as being reinforced from the government onwards, from the state entities to deliver more quality of the ESG actions and reports?
Is it a question to the European Commission?
Yes, it's for you, Jochen.
Okay. Well, the European Commission has taken the initiative to have the EU taxonomy regulation and not a directive. So we felt that here the action was at the European level. But of course, we see that it also gets a lot of traction in the member states, because we have had to set up the taxonomy, not only the technical expert group, but also a member state consultative body. And we monitor closely the emissions of or issuance of green bonds by governments. Luxembourg, Germany, France come to my mind, Sweden. So this is going up on the agenda. Now it's the standard setting is probably done as we propose best at European level, but we are at the early stages here. So it took us, I think, a fair amount of 2 years' time to come up with something credible for the climate change mitigation efforts, and we identified activities. So this is going forward, but the environmental field is much broader. And now we have to explore this under a very ambitious time frame. We see good support by the member states. You also see, for instance, if we now see the compromise of the European Council from July on the midterm budget and the recovery and resilience facilities, that there are also green notions have been taken up and placed very prominently. And this is a compromise by member states. So it's not the Commission in its ownness who is deciding and proposing things. No, we have here the support and the buy-in of very important member states, and basically a consensus, because budget decisions at European level are taken at consensus. So we see a lot of government action coming here. And I would like to reflect quickly, if I may, give me a sign, please, come back to your initial question. So when you ask, so what are the sector requirements? Of course, coming from the public sector, I have to say that also the public sector is spending a lot. And how are we using ESG in order to do our spending? And there again, and this the bridge to the spending programs at European level, but also green budgeting for our normal activities comes much more to the fore. So we see this as a growing trend. And we have now picked with climate change mitigation activities those which are very well explored. And EURES has already 10 years of professional sustainalytics experience on greenhouse gas emissions. But there are other areas, adaptation, biodiversity, water, where we have much less data available. And this will be also a real test and a very interesting field for research and education, where people who are starting their careers and who are at the edge of research can contribute a lot to the discussion. So we see it as a very interesting policy development from our side. We also see ESG as a pull factor for research, because the ESG objectives will trigger the need to come up with more solutions, most of them which are not yet here, or if they are here, they need to be scaled up, and this will provide enough incentive for companies to jump on these investment opportunities if the public sector orients itself. Does this answer your question to a certain extent?
Thank you. Yes. One just quick question, if you allow me, regarding the policy changes. Do you think this is going to be easily brought into execution? What would be the obstacles to your view? Just, I don't know, outline a few.
Yeah. So where do we see the obstacles? The obstacles come clearly from the ambition that we have in order to achieve the climate objectives from the Paris Agreement. This is huge. The amounts calculated are around 260 billion euros each and every year to invest it in energy infrastructure in Europe, also from the private side. And this at a time when we are emerging from a crisis. It's a huge challenge. So we see, whilst the political level is fully committed and we see buy-in from large corporations, this will be to keep the momentum and get these volumes going. This will be a huge challenge. The other thing, and I have some knowledge on this, is also to avoid carbon leakage. So there is the proposal from the European Commission for a carbon border adjustment mechanism. So to avoid that carbon-heavy industries leave Europe and produce elsewhere, and we do not really solve the problem. So there's another challenge to get this through the international fora. World Trade Organization is one of them, but maybe also bilateral trade agreements. There we will have to do a lot. What we understand is that cement and steel are sectors who are potentially interested in pioneering the carbon border adjustment mechanism for certain products in their field. So this could be an interesting avenue forward. We also have to see the amount of technology sovereignty we have in Europe. So with the von der Leyen Commission, we now have the notion of sovereignty much more in the foreground. And the issue is that we would like to see a stronger European lead here. So we need to have intelligent development of value chains as proposed by Commissioner Breton, who is shaping our industrial policy. So he wants to see that Europe and its partners develop a consistent approach so that we do avoid mistakes made in the case, for instance, of solar panels or photovoltaic in industries. So these are challenges which are really real, which we have to address.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That's a very comprehensive answer. Thank you.
Okay.
If one of the panelists would like to come back to any of the questions before, if not, I propose that we move to the next topic. Is everybody okay?
look, I was just if I can weigh in there, I was just gonna say that when I sit and listen, and obviously when you follow some of the developments in Europe, despite the challenges that Joe is talking about, and you think about the other continents of the world where they're really not as advanced, it's a lot of work that has to go into that that can still be done, especially from other parts of the world, and there's a lot of learning that other continents can learn, and other international bodies actually can learn from what Europe is from what Europe is doing. You find that I think increasingly governments are taking this seriously. Like governments are prioritizing, they're making sure that ESG and sustainability is part and parcel of their development priorities, and whether that is actually filtering down to the companies and let alone the smaller entities that are not listed on the stock exchange. That is still something that is left to that is left to be seen. But I think one must also, as you talk about, we talk about the importance of standardization and regulation and government prioritization. One must also be careful to understand that it's not just about standardizing. It's also about making sure that we develop smart regulation and smart policies. Otherwise, we end up with a situation where often you find that sectors kind of naturally evolve, and sometimes need to find that balance between allowing natural evolution of things so they settle where they need to settle versus actually putting regulatory things in place, because sometimes we've seen that regulation can actually impede the natural growth of the natural flow of things, which can have its own effects. So finding that balance is always going to be a tricky one. But some of the impediments that Joe mentioned there, it's something that even right at Africa here, where I'm wrestling, is something that we see quite a bit. It's one thing to talk about these things, but it's very costly for companies, and you find that bigger companies tend to be a little bit more comfortable, and they to invest that amount of money into compliance, into reporting on ESG issues. But the smaller companies, where they also need to be very involved on issues around ESG, but they don't have the resources to be able to do that, and that becomes a big issue, especially when you're dealing with governments where budgets are quite tight, and you hope that governments can give a little bit of assistance, not necessarily financially, but in terms of just prioritization. And the government has got a lot of power, whether it's the tax and spend power the government has, or is their ability to directly spend in the economy, or is actually the ability to I think Joe made the point. Government also invests, and if government can use their can be a role model in terms of how it prioritizes an investment, I think that starts giving a say to the entire sector or the entire economy as to what's priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Godfrey. Sorry, was anybody else? There is a microphone here, I think, coming up. Okay, I propose that we move to the next point on our agenda. And the question is why we need raising the awareness about sustainable economy and the success of having sustainable economy development in terms of the value created by the companies, and what are the actions required by the European Commission. And in this respect, I would address a question to all of you and let you think a bit about it, and I'm coming back to you one by one. And the question is, what is the one thing that you would tell the board of directors of the supreme entity which is leading a company? What would you tell the board of directors about the importance of the ESG in driving value for an organization? And whilst I'm leaving you thinking about it, I will start actually with Nada. Nada, if you are okay with it.
Yes, of course.
Because I know you have with Henley a wealth of studies in which you have looked at the board of directors and you have an impressive amount of information. So far, I remember you have a study in 43 countries in all of over 19,000 organizations regarding the board of directors and leading companies. And what is your perspective on that when it comes to boards? How should companies and other entities, but companies mainly, and their leadership, mainly their boards, balance meeting shareholder value with meeting the social and environmental agenda? How they should balance this?
First of all, depends in which country you are and where you are. Secondly, shall we say, take for example EU. You have what is the most important for a board, any board, small company, large company, that they have quality of dialogue in the board. I'm not saying debate, but dialogue, because debate is very adversarial. Debate is I win, you lose. We're debating and one is going, and that is a very, very negative concept for a boardroom. You have to have a dialogue. Uh, don't forget, the board is a meeting place of various interests. So ESG is as one interest as opposed as a shareholder interest, where you have to find a meeting point to resolve that. So the quality of dialogue, it makes or breaks any initiative in the board. So my advice is have a good quality of dialogue on the board. Okay. If it doesn't matter what is the issue. Is it ESG? Is it strategy? Is it merger? Is it acquisition? Whatever it is, that quality of dialogue is a breaker. So that is the most important thing. Why I said that it depends on the context. It's very important. If you operate in United States or you're operating in Europe, it's a completely different context. And the concept of ESG and the CSR was more academic concept in USA than it's operational concept. Now there are some more, but it's nothing what we actually trying to do in Europe. So it depends on the context, depends on the legal system, and don't forget the many companies, for example, in the United States, decide that it's easier to pay the fines if they don't do, for example, pollute environment, than actually implement good strategy not to pollute environment. So it depends also whenever you have a framework. It depends that framework, is it any system, monitoring system, that framework is respected? Is it a legal system which can help reinforce that framework? If the legal system is not there to reinforce the framework, that many companies are going to take shortcuts. And yeah. It's a wonderful if everybody is of a high ethical standard, then we wouldn't have been in this situation. However, we know that many companies are trying to satisfy shareholders, and they cut the corners. They absolutely cut the corners. And so when they cut the corners, do you have monitoring system that is going to pick it up? And when you pick it up, what is the consequences of that? If there are no consequences, nothing is going to change. So we need, I think there are certain things that to be regulated and has to be supported by the legal system.
Yeah, it's like always, people need somehow reinforcements to make things happen. And from this perspective, I'm going to the first question I addressed to the panel, and I may kindly ask for your opinion. What would you tell the board of directors who is in charge of, giving this kind of framework and incentives to do things about the importance of ESG in driving value for their organization?
If I can weigh in there, and just to echo what Nada just said, but maybe not necessarily to echo, but to give the other side of things, because she's right in terms of if you don't find common regulation for these entities, you're going to end up with companies caught in the corners. And in the short term, if you have the companies doing the right thing, being outmaneuvered by the companies doing the wrong thing, then you're actually sending a very bad impetus in the marketplace, which is not good. But I think from a board point of view, obviously, board is really at the pinnacle of fiduciary responsibility for the entity. And I think if we're able to also demonstrate to the board this growing trend, and maybe like I think Jory said early on, 10 years ago, the situation was quite different, but there's a very clear, unmistakable trend towards prioritization of ESG and sustainability issues towards issues of being a good corporate citizen. And if we're able to demonstrate that to a board who must really be looking at the long-term future of the organization that they represent, they really must start taking this thing seriously, because we find that more and more in funds and investments or fund managers are sitting out there with funds with ESG mandate. There's a lot of capital being pushed in this direction, and the more companies can embrace ESG, the more they can be open to receiving, to benefiting from these funds, whether it's through the stock exchange or through direct investment. So it's maybe it's a little bit of enticing them and telling them what they stand to benefit by doing that, notwithstanding the cost. But there's also a clear sense of, especially with the younger generation, they're looking. People are starting. The younger people are asking more and more. The importance of these entities and how they impact the society that they operate in, how they impact the community, and they are actually, making very conscious consumer decisions based on how they perceive these entities. And these entities want to make sure they are future fit, they are staying within, they are adapting early on as opposed to being forced at the very late stage where if their competitors get a head start, they actually could end up being losers. Another angle to also look at this would be from a skills point of view. You find that the younger people, again, I keep going back to younger people, but more and more they're starting to not just look for jobs, but they're trying to look for companies that are more aligned with their own interests and with their own value system. And you find that more and more, and research is, there's so much research out there that younger people, the young skill set is actually looking for entities that is more aligned with their own values. And because if a company is not necessarily taking that seriously and at the board level telling directors, you may end up with a situation where you're not able to attract good talent and you'll be losing out to your competitors. So these are things that you must take seriously whilst you can and whilst you can do it on your own terms, as opposed to waiting for a time when you'll be compelled to do so, either because you're losing out in the marketplace or the government through regulation forces you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Godfrey. Is any of my other invitees willing to comment on the question?
I'm definitely ready from the side of the European Commission to weigh in. There's not much space between what Godfrey said from an African SME and entrepreneurial perspective to how it comes from our side. So we see the elements raised by him, the market, the employees, the stakeholders, the future employees play a very important role. But I hope not surprisingly for you, our slide deck when we sell the European Green Deal, when we sell or we promote, advance, speak about initiatives from Europe. We also advance the ESG as the business opportunity of the next decades to come, because the climate change pressure and the pressure on biodiversity is so huge that we feel that all societies around the world will come around this point. And if you are an early mover, then you have a distinct advantage. And Europe is here to prepare the ground, to prepare the framework that European companies are there to take these advantages by adopting early and working inside a framework, developing the markets, the products, the services, which will be able to deliver into a world where we have climate change, climate mitigation, biodiversity issues very high on the agenda, and where many of the solutions offered need to address these. And if European companies have had the time to develop, to sharpen their skills, to train their workforce, to educate the young people coming to them in this respect, it is a strong business opportunity. So talking to the board, whilst we say, yes, you have shareholders, we introduce with you, hopefully with the non-financial reporting directive coming in the Q2 of 2021, obligations for bigger companies. All this we will introduce, and double materiality, so financial materiality and environmental materiality will come, all these things, but we hope which swings the boards into our line and into our favor is clearly the business opportunity behind it, and the chances which a company which is informed, aligned, and perhaps on top in the development of green technologies, this will clearly help. Another issue is the social dimension, because we cannot concede to the race to the bottom, where more and more social standards are given away. So being technologically in the lead, having the deep understanding will allow us to protect well-paid jobs and social standards, which allow us to continue our European way of living. And to do this, we will create the framework conditions for these companies, and we have created them. So this is the European level answer to your very pertinent question. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. Thank you very much for the answer. Joris, would you like to jump in with your
Yeah,
perspective regarding the board?
yeah, maybe just a short comment. Everybody always wants to talk to the board. And in my experience, that's not always necessary. They are not the easiest people to access. And often, if you can get a lot done talking to people that are high up in other departments like sustainability or investor relations, and they often have quite practical mandates to change things for the good. And when I just listened to Nada earlier, also that of course there's always corners being cut, and you feel like greenwashing is always at risk. But I sometimes feel I have a choice between turning cynical or staying a bit naive like a child, and I don't want to be either. But I'd rather be slightly naive and positive than looking at all the problems and what's not working. And so for me, I think it's a journey for all of us as sustainability professionals to find that angle that fits you and gives you a perspective and a future. And for me, it's very clear that even though corners are caught and it's too much about money and too little about what Jochen said about social quality and the other side, the environment and the integrity. Um, my experience is that in almost every company, it's not hard to find intrinsically genuinely motivated people, individuals in those companies that are striving for the good. And maybe if you don't like capitalism or like systemic flaws, then you're having a hard time. But if you dare to be slightly optimistic, then there's definitely a lot of room to work with those people in those companies and to sort of shake the tree and persist and then at some point it ends up at board level. But sometimes it's just better to work with other people first.
Yes, thank you. I would just add a quick question here, and really wanting to stir up a little bit the waters. Um, is it the greenwash issue? Because yeah, we like now to do that, and Nada mentioning in her presentation. Is it a challenge now? Is it something that we should, of course, not only follow, but talking about checking the trees, that we should check in the tree and not allow corporations to go easily out? And if so, because I assume that the answer is yes, of course, what should we do in order to shake the trees? What do you think would be, just in few comments, because you mentioned it, what would be making the tree shed the leaves
Okay.
which are not okay?
All these metaphors make it difficult maybe, but uh,
Let's think about the
I'm
greenwashing.
not in my daily work. I'm not worried about greenwashing too much, and maybe that's me being naive again. But what my challenge is to look through the marketing source. So if I go to a website and see what they report on sustainability or how they do their advertisements, and there is definitely an element of greenwash marketing there. But it's not always a very thick sauce. And so if you have seen many other companies, of course you need a good marketing source. You want to sell, and you want to sell an idea, and there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes it obscures a bit how good you really are. And
Mhm.
so companies like ours are passionate about, yeah, just digging deeper and trying to establish a level playing field. So we know there's one developed markets company with very fancy disclosure on his website, and there's, say, an emerging markets company with nothing at all. They don't do any disclosure, but their product is sustainable. So what they do is better than what they put on the website. And so there is an art there that you can have all these taxonomies and all these requirements for reporting. They serve a purpose, but they are not the end goal. The end goal is to have a sustainable economy. And so for me, that's interesting. And so that's more interesting than focusing on the downside of people trying to manipulate you every day.
Thank you, Doris. Very good answer. Yes, thank you. If
If I may come in on this,
please,
so the outright purpose of the EU taxonomy is to avoid greenwashing. But we also did decide to make it this reporting not obligatory but voluntary. So we will have to see how the EU taxonomy is taken up in the market. Huh? So we walked here a very fine line. We did not say this and that and the other. We made it clear that this is going to be a way that Europe proposes to have a common language which allows financial actors, taxonomy applies to financial actors and governments at this stage, to move forward. And only later on with the Article 8 initiative under the taxonomy, we will move to the corporate space, and we will see what this brings to the fore. But we feel that whilst yours is very versed to cut through many leaves, that this might not be the case for everyone. And so the chosen route of the Commission was to provide a greenwashing avoidance scheme in the form of the taxonomy, if I may say so, without regulating deep and hard from A to Z everything. And you will still have to have a sound answer for the import sectors and for the SMEs who will have their own challenges in front of them. And we talked briefly about it. Thank you.
thank you. I propose that we move now to the last point on our agenda, and we move, of course, towards education. We do not claim that education is the main factor to change and to bring transformation deep within the organization. But we do claim that it's an important pillar, because if you want to start having ESG professionals and having ESG developments and transformation of the whole company, you need to have people there being aware and working, executing the strategy. So, of course, we go back to education. So the question is education one of the major pillars of this transformation to raising the awareness and the level of the proficiency for the ESG professionals? And, yes and no, and what would be the challenges? I would start, Godfrey, talking to you this time, because we know the purpose and the rationale of IASE existence. And I'm asking you, how do you think we ensure that certain ESG standards are being implemented and followed, because we are thinking about certifying people within a company?
Thank you. I think let me just use a couple of maybe two other professions to be able to emphasize this importance of education. If you look at how professions have evolved over time, you look at whether it's a medical profession, accounting profession, legal profession, you name it, and I'll even say social work. Which, if you take before pre to the Second World War, it was kind of this field where everybody was involved in, and people who couldn't find anything else to do kind of was involved in that space. And if you look at even financial services in various parts of the world, and depending on how evolved this sector is at the current moment. But if you look at financial services, take 4 decades ago, you find that the need for financial services was always there and it was evolving. And then later on, government started trying to make sure that they can put more control or more regulation, more policy making around issues around financial services, just because of the huge impact it could have on economies around the world. And you find that once that need came up, various people who struggled to find a job somewhere or somehow found themselves in financial service. They were doing different things. I'm not saying this because it's to say that it's bad. I'm saying that this is how things naturally evolve, where people find themselves and opportunities, people jump in. But over time, as that sector becomes more and more important, as social work became more and more important to various countries around the world, and government stepped up to be able to put some rules around social work, you found that suddenly, 40 years ago, you didn't have any kind of there was no kind of formal qualification to be a social worker. Today, it's a very, very regulated space from an education point of view. People are even have a PhD in social work. Now that I'm trying to use this example to be able to paint the picture of where we are with ESG. Obviously, sustainability has been with us for some time. ESG is quite a big one. We can see from every single trend, whether it's the amount of money flowing to ESG with investment mandates, or just the people and the systems and governments taking more interest in making sure that we have a sustainable economy. As ESG becomes more and more important, there is a need for standardization. We've been discussing that throughout this panel discussion. I think we've had some good discussions. But with standardization of ESG also comes in need to standardize when it comes to education, because remember that as ESG becomes mainstream, we need to make sure that we have sufficient capacity, human capacity, and competence levels within the economy so companies can rely on these capacities. I think Joris made the point early on that you find that the ESG teams in these companies are still relatively small, even though the responsibility has been growing. That may be a function of, it may actually be a function of, companies not putting more resources into, or bringing on board more resources, or it may just be a lack of resources, because you find that again in this ESG space, many of us are in the ESG space not because we have actually done any kind of formal studies. We've kind of found ourselves here, and it's through experiential learning. Same as some people found themselves being social workers and they've kind of evolved. Same as some people found themselves being financial advisors in the days and they've now evolved to become professionals. We're now at the crossroads where, because everybody's talking about sustainability and issues around ESG becoming very important, as we're talking about standardization, we really need to be talking about how do we ensure that as economies start prioritizing and really putting rules around issues around ESG, that the economies have enough and sufficient and competent human capacity to be able to ensure that these companies can rely on. If a company is going to embrace ESG, you need to make sure that from the top to the bottom, they have a good grasp of ESG, and education can play a very, very key role. And that is where, from my point of view, where the International Association for Sustainable Economy comes in, especially at the global, setting education standards and certification standards at the global level, because at that level, you ensure that you're developing standards, education standards that match the standards that has been set at the global level, at the European Union level with respect to ESG. Like that, it becomes very easy for ESG professionals and companies to interact with each other around the world, knowing fully well that there's a common level of understanding as to what it means to be an expert on ESG matters. And I think that for me is very, very key.
Yes, thank you very much, Godfrey. One quick additional question. Do you believe that the IASE certifications are ensuring that the ESG standards are going to be implemented and followed?
Yes, I do believe it. I think that's quite obvious. For, at the core of what we do at IASE, that is where we put, again, we are a professional body. We said education and certification and competency standards when it comes to ESG professionals around the world. So like that, we ensure that we put all the necessary emphasis to ensuring that whatever standards come with, that we put out there are sufficient to be able to deliver on the mandate that we expect people to deliver on. But it's also very important that we give the public, because ultimately as a professional body, professionals do serve the public. It's very important we give the public and companies and employers and organizations a sense of comfort that whoever that IASE says holds a certain designation, a certain professional credential, it means that they are actually worth their weight. They actually come through this very rigorous process that we have put in place to ensure it gives people a sense of comfort that they are now dealing with professionals. So that's something we take quite seriously, and I really believe that it's a way of the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Godfrey. Thank you very much. I would like to move a little bit in the direction of talking about ESG successful strategies and the fact that if well implemented and executed, hopefully by the teams of professionals and all of you, as all of you mentioned, that they are so much needed, theoretically and practically, all the stakeholders involved, from the shareholders to the workforce and the suppliers, the ecosystem participants in the communities and so on, will actually benefit. And we go back to a very critical issue, in my opinion, and as Nada as well mentioned it in her presentation, that we should look actually when talking about leadership and company leadership, that we should look at the companies who have their mission at core and are mission based and not vision based. And I liked very much the comment that she did there. And I would like to challenge you with a question regarding the purpose of the company. The reason why the company exists or the entity exists. Therefore the mission. Is the purpose of a company really dictating the ESG strategies on the long term? It should do it. It should not do it. What is your opinion on that?
Are you asking me or?
Yes, Nada, please.
Okay. That debate about what is the purpose of companies, a very long one, it's from 1920s onwards, and academics have debated it on and off through different timing, and really started in 1920s by Harvard Business School and Harvard Law School, which Harvard Law School was talking about the really mission of companies, way how it is, that the purpose of the company cannot be only for a financial gain, because society is going to lose it, going to lead to the corruption. And Harvard Business School won the argument, and lawyers lost, but they make the money later on from much more, because of course how it was set as an agency theory and not as a stewardship theory. There are many law cases going on, so that they're making the money. So really, especially till 80s, Milton Friedman argument that the only purpose of organization is to preserve shareholders' wealth and shareholders' wealth.
Profit.
Of course, profits. And of course, it was challenged by Edmund Freeman, who said, well, we need to think about stakeholders as well. So shareholder arguments for a long time. Of course, companies have to be profitable, otherwise they'll exit the market. That is no doubt. But it is really the argument is how much profitable they have to be. And they can be profitable with responsibility. So they're responsible towards society and environment. Because the only purpose of the company is there really to satisfy some social need. If there is no social need, why would you need that company? In satisfying that social need, which is what the mission organization, what they're there for, of course they have to make a profit, provide service or products. But is that done with responsibility towards environment and society? Okay, so that is the thing. And some company, of course, we have a lot of non-for-profit organization or what they call social enterprises, which are having to make a money, but they're using that for social good. Of course, not every company can be for social good, and not every company can be NGO for not for profit. It is fine to have companies which for profit, but that profit has to be responsible. It is, if you pollute environment and make a profit, or can you produce the same product in without pollution to the environment, with the better filters, with the better equipment, with better things. So that is the issue, rather than a profit. Of course, you'll have to have a profitable organization, otherwise they'll exit the market.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Nada. I wanted to challenge you a little bit, all of you, around the purpose, because the idea, as you mentioned it's actually coming from a long way already. And somehow in the quest for profits and globalization and everything, without being advocating for any kind of political party pre now, we are nevertheless talking about long-term existence of humanity. And if we don't think about sustainable economy, sustainable development, we will not exist. And if we don't care now, because our lifespan, it's, I don't know, 70 years or 80, or I don't know, I mean, not that much or not that long, careless living of today, it's going to damage long-term existence. And there is a reason why we exist. Without believing in any other spiritual ideas and dimensions, we are responsible for what we leave onwards to our children and to our followers. So I wanted to challenge you with a purpose. Thank you very much for answering. If everybody is okay with it, and if you don't have any other comments, I would like to move to my last question, which is addressed to all of you. And I would kindly ask you to jump, each of you, one by one, once you feel ready. The question is, what do you think? Will companies stick to their ESG strategies during this economic turbulence? I'm talking about the COVID-19, of course, pandemics and the era we are living in, and especially what is going to come after, because as we look at it, the outcome is that we won't go out of these times sooner than 2023. So will companies stick to these strategies during this economic turbulence, or only when the times were good? Who would like to jump in?
Well, I can just say my observation, and I haven't done research yet because although I'm doing research in the United States at the moment, and I have some data from the United States, that many companies were first of all unprepared to deal with the crisis, the pandemic or any other big crisis. Many companies are actually what we're seeing, and of course the government has stepped in, and we have payments made by government is throwing a lot of money in it. But many companies, what they're seeing, are reducing their workforce. So we have enormous reduction of workforce. The question is, where is the workforce going to find the new jobs if economy is shifting? So that is we're going to have a big casualties, and that was happening with industrial revolution, of second wave, when we have a lot of casualties when industrialization took place. And I think this is going to also be a transition point to new economy, much more digital-based economy. And a lot of people are going to be, whole generations are going to be lost generation, because we haven't educate them to have a new transfer skills and sufficiently. We haven't planned that sufficiently in advance, and many governments are taking this position to transition to the new economy. Yes, it's pandemic. Yes, we're dealing with it, but we also want to change economy. So when we go on the other side, it'll be different economy. It's not going to be what it used to be. In meantime, we're going to transfer the workforce, and a lot of workforce is going to be So if you think in ESG terms, are we socially responsible? Many won't be. Okay, they won't. Maybe they'll meet environmental targets, but certainly they won't meet social targets because it'll be whole generation dispersed.
Yes.
That's how
Thank
I
you
see.
thank you very much, Nada.
Yeah.
Godfrey, would you like to jump in? Or
Yes,
yeah, please.
yes. I think the jury is still out because we're still right in the middle of the of the pandemic, and who knows how things are going to play out. But and again, for me, this is more of an instinct more than anything else. It took us long as a global economy and global system to get to the point where we are, and I doubt that you know what after this pandemic it will be so shocking to the world where things just change in a different way. I think once this pandemic is behind us, you know, there's some learnings and everything, but I think things are going to default back to where it used to be because it took us long to get here. We can't come out of it so quickly. A lot of things have to happen, though. Government needs to weigh in. A lot of things have to happen for this, for any kind of change or any kind of learning from the pandemic to be sustained. It, right now, everybody, I think countries are too individualistic in their thinking. Everybody's trying to get their own, you know, country and their own people out of the difficult situation they find themselves. Not a lot of global thinking is taking place. However, if there's going to be any kind of meaningful change from an ESG point of view, it's got to be at the global level or at the very least at the regional level as opposed to country specific level. That's what I really think.
Yes. Thank you, Godfrey.
Mhm.
Johan or Doris, would you like to jump in with your conclusions on the pandemic era and the ESG strategies? Will companies stick to their strategies or
We,
try to derive from them?
the European Commission stays committed to its goals. We have launched the Recovery and Resilience Facility with the right incentives. We can not predict companies' actions, especially as Europe goes into the second wave. We should be very modest, very cautious here. But the Commission itself is very clear. The crisis is not an excuse, but a chance to move forward, to stay on track. And we will have to have a good dialogue with the industries, how and why it makes sense to stick also in difficult times to this one and to build on the opportunities. So I think it's too early to make a judgment call. What we have as a strong line forward is we will use the restart of the economy to make it green, sustainable, and transparent and accountable. So this is the European way forward. We building alliances, we work with dialogues, we work with majorities, and this should be our way forward whilst we remain modest in the face of the crisis.
Thank you, Han. That's a very positive and very motivational insight that you gave us. Thank you very much. That's wonderful. Doris, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, maybe a final comment on, just to reflect on what the previous speaker said. I guess it's becoming very controversial to talk in terms of back to normal or back to business as usual. That's probably not possible or desirable. But still, in my daily practice, talking to companies together with investors, there is a big, deep motivation to keep pushing on the existing ESG programs in those companies. And sometimes they tell us, or we lack the capacity at the moment, or there is some corporate action or something beyond the pandemic. The excuses can always be found, but the general trend in the short term, I mean, we've been in this pandemic for over half a year now. That's still an overseeable amount of time for companies. So they're not re-strategizing. Many have their programs in place. They've hired people to push those programs, and that seems to be continuing for now. And that's also supportive of what Jochen said, is that all of us seem to be trying to push through this. and to come out better ideally. Yeah, that's to be optimistic about it. So yeah, I think that's what I could add to
Yes.
this.
Thank you very much for pointing that, talking about the normal. I wanted to mention it, and then I was thinking whether it's not so much use this new normal or the former normal or whatever normal that would be from now on. I think you pointed out very well that whatever it's going to come, it's only to the benefit, because it's actually an opportunity, as Johan also mentioned it, to finally transform ourselves in living to the world of the future, and the future is now. So we
Mm.
should be able to use all these challenges around us, and COVID or not COVID, the transformations are only quicker, much faster, asked and implemented. And I think, honestly, in my personal opinion, that this is an opportunity and not a threat at all. Of course, it depends how we look at it, but if you position it with your, eyesight in front of you and looking to the future, this is an opportunity. I thank you very much, all of you. I would like to finally conclude our panel. It was a wonderful wealth of insights that you gave us during this discussion, and I'm sure that the audience could draw from each perspective that you brought from, from policymakers to corporation to certification to academic, insights for their own ESG experience within their companies. And I wouldn't leave this panel without first of all asking whether you have some, I don't know, one word conclusion or one word insight that you would like to share with us. And whilst you are thinking about it, as a final word to say goodbye to the audience, I would like to wrap it up, and Nada, I hope you allow me, by taking on again to the audience one of your insights from the presentations, talking about the ESG necessity. So first of all, you mentioned 4 points. Inadequate education and valuation models of the ESG are major barriers for integrating the ESG variables into the mainstream of investment decisions. And I think this is very important. Second, ESG works well when is integrated with strategy, but is necessarily that we should work on the operational performance, because we know that any kind of ESG processes involved and need higher investment. So they are attracting costs. Third, the ESG social and political movement is gaining ground, and if it's ignored, and also Joris mentioned it, if it's ignored, it brings reputational damage. And last but not least, ESG enhances reputation, and when we are thinking about especially listed companies, we see that their value is diminished whenever it's an impacting ESG issue on their activity. So I'm leaving you all with these 4 conclusions regarding the necessity, and maybe one final round if anybody would like to share one thought and to leave the audience with it. I should start with the lady in our audience. Nada, please.
For me, that we have all those wonderful initiatives. I think we need also, in addition to education, we need more research to find out the blockages and learn how we can help overcome those blockages in implementation of ESG in the
Thank you.
company level, in the country level and company level.
Thank you very much. Who'd like to join in for the last final word?
I can come in. We as a Commission see ESG as a whole of government approach. So when we speak to member states and inside the Commission, we want to have all around the table. There's something to be had from human rights to accountancy to research to international trade. So this is a whole government approach, many opportunities, and one should not be afraid of the challenge.
Thank you very much, Johan. Who'd like to be next? Doris?
Yeah, I think Godfrey is speaking, but he's muted. So
Oh, I can't
Oh, okay.
see him. Okay.
Sorry about that. I was muted. Look, I would say that I think there is scope for maybe I would like to just end up with the challenge. We still have that challenge of talking about financial performance and embracing ESG as mutually exclusive. And I think we need to do a little bit. We need to challenge ourselves, us as leaders in the field, but the entire world. We need to find some way of ensuring that these things go hand in hand. And in that sense, if you can find that model, then it becomes very logical for companies to embrace. One more thing which I wanted, I wanted to make this point. I would like to see, as we start talking about ESG at regional level, at country level, but what we also find is that, and maybe it's because I'm based in Africa, I would like to see, companies, especially companies in the developed world, their ESG score being measured by their engagement with countries that support or don't support or that have got a very shoddy human rights record and things like that. Because what we find, especially for those of us who are in Africa, we find that, eh, these companies, as they engage with our government, and for good reasons. However, what you find is that uh, these companies are seen more as enablers of governments that are not either democracy elected or they are elected but they don't support human rights the way they should. But that doesn't necessarily feature in terms of how these companies' ESG score is measured wherever they are based. That's an area that I think a little bit more work needs to go into so we can really develop as a global entity, as a global citizen. Thank you.
Thank you, Godfrey.
yeah, maybe I prefer to just close with another word of thanks that I spend most of my time talking to people in the private sector. So this is like an occasion for me to listen to people from public sector as well, academia. So I might be, maybe I should be doing that more often, and also an invitation to others to come out of their daily bubbles and spend this time together and just make sure you connect with other realities as well every now and then. Thank you.
That's a very good point, Doris. Yes, we should, especially now when are isolated physically and social distanced, it's a very good idea to get out of our online bubbles and get more to reality, connected to the reality. So it has been a very hot 2 hours. Thank you so much again. I'm grateful for your time and for your participation. I thank you all for being here. And I would like also to thank Johnson, who is our host today. I know that you are hearing me, you are there somewhere. So thank you very much for preparing, organizing, and supporting us throughout the way with the conference. And good luck to the rest of the panels. Thank you again all, and I wish you a very good day and a very wonderful evening ahead of us. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.